This is Sarah Jones on the Politicus Pod for Politicus USA's The Daily. Today we have some inspiration brought to us by French strikers who have threatened to cut electricity to billionaires and lawmakers. A French union threatened to cut electricity to lawmakers and billionaires before the strike on Thursday. This story is about a strike in France, but it's relevant to American politics because a secure working class is the best antidote to encroaching fascism. And nothing solidifies security for workers better than a union. It's particularly relevant right now as MAGA Republicans threaten to stop paying our nation's bills if they aren't allowed to cut social safety nets for working people. And instead of reacting to Republican hypocrisy and grift, trying to get them to somehow stop what they're doing, as if they would be shamed out of it when clearly that's not even on their radar. It's time to give them something to react to by demanding fairness. And that's something that the people can do if they stand together. Today is the first day of mobilization in France as unions are protesting French President Emmanuel Macron's attempt to raise the retirement age in France from 62 to 64. Retiring at 62 with the pension probably sounds pretty good to most Americans. But this is a story about how we get what we settle for, and we settle for what we are conditioned to accept. This strike is being posed by the media as a test of weakening support for unions who have struggled in France, much like here, to convince workers to strike. I suggest they go and see the nice properties, the nice castles of billionaires. Philippe Martinez, who is a leader of France's second largest trade union, is reported to have said on Wednesday. And indeed, workers did strike and march today across the country, today being Thursday, January 19th. They halted trains and they cut electricity in protest to Macron's plan to raise the retirement age. These stoppages are a major test for President Macron, who said that his pension, quote, reform, unquote, plan, which opinion polls show is highly unpopular, was just and responsible. But the workers who were striking countered it's salaries and pensions that must be increased, not the retirement age. This strike led to a substantial fall in electricity output and halted deliveries from refineries on Thursday. The rate of striking workers that are part of the electric and gas industries union exceeded 50% by midday on Thursday. So this is a story about working people battling entrenched propaganda that is directly against their best interest and does more to mislead than to inform. Much as it is here, this is a hit to workers, and it's being called, quote, pension reform, unquote. And the problem starts right there. Reform is defined as makes changes in parentheses, something, typically a social, political, or economic institution or practice, end parentheses, in order to improve it. So yeah, this is not reform. It's not going to improve the pension plan for workers. It's theft from the working people. It's an attack on security. It's not reform. The BBC explained how the French system works. Under the French system, very few people have personal pension plans linked to capital investments. Instead, the pensions of those who are retired are paid for from the same common fund into which those in work are contributing every month. so workers know they will benefit from the same treatment when they retire. All of the country's unions, including the so-called reformist unions that the government had hoped to win to its side, have condemned the measure, as have the both left-wing and far-right oppositions in their assembly. They're saying right now that the president will likely get support from the right-leaning factions, of course. That's around the globe. We see this. It's an ongoing attack. It's not going to stop. But let's ask ourselves about all the propaganda we've been told about our Social Security. Is anybody else doing it better? Do people have ideas about how this can be done? Is America indeed the best country in the world when it comes to pension? Well, it turns out we aren't even in the top 10. Of the top countries with the best pensions in 2022, the U.S. is not even on the list. That's the top 10, and neither is France. So the top 10 are Iceland, Netherlands, Denmark, Israel, Finland, Australia, Norway, Sweden, Singapore, and the UK. Workers in France, we can see from this list, are already at a disadvantage compared to other countries. The United States ranks 20th on the list. It had an overall grade of C+, and a score of 63.9. So do you want to guess how Iceland pays for that top rating? It's doing what the unions suggested the French government do, which is to say the programs are income related. The amount can decrease if you have other income and can be canceled entirely if your income exceeds a certain amount. This is also filed under why can't we in the United States seem to take anything from the very wealthy. They throw up these huge fits about, that they wouldn't have access to certain things. I just don't know why greed has become such a value, but it's very problematic. If greed wasn't a something that people aspire to and have long since stopped even trying to excuse, but now aspire to it, then we wouldn't have ever had Donald Trump as president. Unions are basically collective bargainings, which is a way of gathering enough power to take a stand against the powers setting the working conditions so you can secure higher wages and better benefits. I had the great fortune of being a member of the Screen Actors Guild when I was working in film, and not only was the insurance absolutely incredible, but everything there was nothing that you had to argue about, because everything was set. If you do this extra piece of work, you're going to get paid extra. If you work a 20-hour day, you're getting paid for that overtime. And when you work a 36-hour day, which did happen once, I believe that was double time. So and also I continue to get paid for those films. Not anything, I'm not, I wasn't a highly paid person, so it's not like I'm rolling in cash. I'm not going to be able to retire on that money. But if I had continued working in the industry, it would have provided a cushion, and that's something that could be said for every industry in our country. Everyone should have that. We should all experience that, and it should be something that we could even count on to have a decent life. Nobody is really talking about, I want to live like Elon Musk and have my own jet and fly around. No, it's just having a house that you can, and a decent apartment or house, and be able to pay for your groceries and your bills and not be worried about it. And I don't think that's too much to ask. And I think it's absolutely unethical and immoral that we've been so conditioned to believe that is a symptom of greed in the people. It's absolutely not. The arguments against unions read like our entire culture. You know, they simp for billionaires. Here is a take by the Editors Guild on the against union arguments. And obviously this is coming from a union. So you might wonder, why am I using the argument against coming from a union who are clearly have an agenda? Yes, because this piece is centered on workers. So I'm going to, that's up front. So this isn't a let's talk about what the people who always get the press need. They already have the media. They don't need my little Substack and my little podcast to simp for them. They've already got everything. So we're going to talk here about what works for workers. And I like the way that they put this argument forth, because they really cut through the dishonesty in a way that was too good to dismiss. The anti-union arguments management makes tend to cluster around three major themes. Employees should trust management to do what's best for everyone without management having to formally negotiate with employees. 2, the union can't be trusted. And 3, sticking with the status quo is better than the uncertainty. And if you think about all three of those, that does really sum up all of the arguments that we hear, not only against unions, but really against accountability. All the ways that the really wealthy people, and if we just want to look back at Elon and the way he's treating workers at Twitter, it's been pretty horrific, really brutal, and that it shouldn't be allowed to happen. Especially not with, he was at the time the world's richest person. He's now, I believe, the second richest. Poor little Elon. But there's no excuse for this. This whole belief system that we have, that we can extract all this from the majority so that a few people can live in unthinkable wealth. It's absurd, and it's so wrong. In the United States, we have the Republican Party that stands most defiantly against unions, including rejecting thousands of good-paying jobs for their residents. And this just happened in Virginia with Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin, who the media kept telling us was a moderate, but of course he is not. He's not a moderate by any stretch of the imagination. He just got busted for halting a Ford plant in Virginia that, according to sources, would have provided really great jobs. That plant in Virginia was supposed to be located in, I'm not from Virginia, so Pittsylvania County near Danville, and is one of the poorest areas in Virginia. The $3.5 billion plant would have created an estimated 2,500 jobs in the south side of Virginia. Our whole culture, anti-union, anti-worker, pro-big corporation, pro-big billionaire, a moderate killing jobs for people in one of the poorest areas of his state because he's against unions. That's not moderation. Who can forget in 2014 when South Carolina's then Governor Nikki Haley announced that Detroit's big three automakers should look elsewhere because she discourages companies from building new facilities in South Carolina if they're planning to bring a union with them. You see how the union really separates out who is on the side of the people? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And even her Democratic opponent at the time couldn't muster up full-throated support for unions, saying he thought the state should remain a right-to-work state where workers are free to decide whether to join unions or not. That's not how unions work. Right-to-work states do not, in effect, offer choices as their main function. And when employers are given options to not be unionized, that's the way they're going to go. And everyone knows that. So when you hear these are just really sad excuses And we've seen this decreasing for decades support for unions. It's actually, I think I just saw, starting to increase a little bit here in the United States, but globally, support has weakened. And speaking of that, nurses are on strike right now in Britain, and they are struggling to pay their own bills. Ambulance workers are planning to go on strike. The NHS faces the prospect of the biggest walkout in its history, the headlines tell us. They're being maligned, though, with the same kind of anti-worker propaganda that we get here. Here's just a taste of it. Striking workers are being greedy, and their demands are unaffordable. Where is the big effort to mobilize the country against these greedy union extremists? Inflation matching or inflation busting pay rises are unaffordable. There simply isn't the money. You notice how there's always money for tax cuts for the rich? And I believe that, I don't know the history in the UK, I don't pay a lot of attention to it, but I do remember reading that the royals could make and did make arguments against paying taxes from some of their money creating ventures. So yeah, there's always a way to make money, and it doesn't have to be on the backs of working people every single time. And in fact, it shouldn't be. And none of these arguments that I just read to you, these kind of accusations against workers and bad faith arguments, they don't take into account the issues and complaints and even the crisis level emergency that's facing the healthcare system in the UK, in Britain, into account, and we certainly have that going on here as well. They place all of the burden right back on workers. And in this case, it's nurses who, after nearly 3 years of a global pandemic, they're struggling to make their own rent. And that's just not acceptable. The headlines against nurses in Britain tell us a lot about why we here in the United States are at a place where the Republican-led House seeks to, quote, reform, quote, what they call entitlements of working people so they can give more welfare to the top 1%. Republicans here want to make cuts to Social Security and Medicare, even as they bleat on about inflation. Where is the worker in their scenario? How do they expect people to live with cuts to retirement benefits when people can't afford to buy food right now, let alone pay for their rent or mortgage using Social Security and even with supplemental work income? People are literally struggling to pay for their groceries, and Republicans want to cut their Social Security. Every time when workers engage in industrial action, it's exceptionally threatening to the ruling class, and the ruling class now gets most of the coverage in terms of points of view in news, and especially on cable news, at least here. Economic issues are covered as the way they impact Wall Street or elections, but rarely do we center the working family that can't make ends meet. Our media sides automatically with the powerful against the people way too often, and we saw this when the media repeatedly attacked rape victims and peaceful protesters during Brett Kavanaugh's phony confirmation hearings. There's ways to tell a story as a journalist. We pick a side even when this is denied. In fact, I would posit that it's even worse when it's denied because the point of view of, quote, objectivity, unquote, is too often the point of view of the most powerful people, of the establishment. And that can be anything. The establishment Beltway press, access journalism, the talking points of the wealthy owners of these media companies. This is why you hear so little criticism of the democracy killing actions of power couple Clarence and Ginny Thomas. We all know Clarence Thomas shouldn't be on the Supreme Court. He should not be on the Supreme Court after what his wife did to our democracy. But he doesn't even recuse himself. Very few people call that out. They're this huge power couple, and it's kind of gross when you see the way all of that works and how in any industry, and this is an industry, the people with the most power, everyone sucks up to them because everyone wants to be near power. And this is kind of what I'm getting to, that we have to change this frame within ourselves, the way we view our own power and our own position in this dynamic. It has to change. We've all been conditioned to see ourselves as the little cogs. We've got to keep doing all this work and asking for nothing. It's wrong, and it's got to stop. We have this power. We saw this in the midterm when we show up. So if you tell the story about the power outages from industrial action from the point of view of the people who are impacted in the short term, that is a choice. If you label workers as greedy without even asking to hear about their lived experiences, without even understanding the financial despair that many people are facing right now, that's a choice. If you refuse to even address, let alone center, the valid concerns of workers who are striking, that's a choice. So this is a story about working people standing up to power. The courage to make that stand involves rejecting media and government attempts to guilt them out of striking. So, I don't know if that hits you the way it does me, but boy, we've seen that here for so long. And our whole media industrial complex joins in on that one. And you see the way everything's framed. The media is still calling Republicans fiscal conservatives. And I made a joke yesterday on Twitter that Republicans only identify as fiscal conservatives when there's a Democrat in the White House. They're not fiscal conservatives. Look at that deficit they ran up under Trump. No. Why are they still being called that? And there's all this moral high ground that's given to that phrase. Fiscal hawks, fiscal conservative, responsible. These people aren't responsible. Who are the responsible people? Actually, it's all the workers in this country going to work every day, even during a pandemic, showing up when it endangered their own health. They have to pay their own bills. They don't get to declare bankruptcy and after they've squeezed all the money out of a company like wealthy people do in this country. Workers are the responsible people. And when I say workers, I'm not just talking about one level. And that's another thing that has to change. We're all in this together. If you're not in the top 1%, you're in this fight. We're all in this together. This is it has become, because they have increasingly made it so with income inequality and disparity, they have made it so that it's this top 1% absorbing all the resources in the world. And it remains to be seen if France's unions can summon the will from the members to continue striking. But workers might want to notice their efforts. Workers here in the United States, there's a great power in the people, and that is why the ruling class works so hard to brainwash people against their own best interests. In the middle of economic strife and inflation, asking workers to take yet another hit instead of coming up with a fair and creative way to truly support workers is not only unsustainable, but will eventually lead to instability for the entire country. It is possible to provide a decent pension, as the top countries listed above prove. It is simply a matter of will. Do we have this kind of patriotism here? Could we even imagine rousing generations of workers who've been brought up to worship billionaires and corporations? We must summon the will to seek and embolden the power of solidarity that's inherent in unions. I look forward to seeing what's going to happen in France, what's happening in the UK, and I hope that people in the United States are paying attention and will come together to fight this attack on their fundamental right to dignity. This episode is dedicated to my beloved grandfather, who was a staunch union leader. This is Sarah Jones on the Politicus Pod for Politicus USA's The Daily. If you are tired of billionaires controlling the news, setting the narrative, centering other top 1%, and you want to support independent news that puts the people first, please subscribe to our Substack. Thank you, and I hope you have a great day.